All right, hello students. Today we're going to focus on the behavior view of learning, and I'm going to go over the assignment that we're doing in our discussion board area as well. So this is going to be a brief synopsis. There'll be some links and websites that go to some of the references that I've been referring to as we move along. So here's what we're looking for. This is a focused activity. I'm going to put it at the end, but also I'm going to show it at the beginning as well. After we review the content and you look over the materials, you're going to choose two of these three. Of the three topics, you're going to choose two of them and write up to a 500-word component addressing the objectives of each one. The first one is defining learning from a behavior perspective, include ties to the neuroscience and the processes involved in learning through the four methods that are showed there. And the second one is we're going to apply behavior approaches to modify behavior in and out of the classroom. And you're going to use the applied behavior analysis approach to encourage and discourage behaviors, shaping positive practice, take token reinforcement activities. But you're going to come up with a plan for that if you see a scenario from your observations that you've had. Third, you're going to apply functional behavior assessment. That's the positive behavior support and the self-management techniques. So you can do those. The first one is more book knowledge. So if you wanted to do that, and then the second one is almost a theory and practice, I would choose the second or the third one, whichever one you're most comfortable with. So the learning objectives for this are we're going to define the behavior perspective. The second, we're going to look at the applied behavior approach. And then finally, third, we're going to do the applied functional behavior assessment component as well. So outline of behavior, and we want to understand what learning looks like to a behaviorist. And we're going to cover the applied behavior analysis, and we're going to look at some of the challenges and the criticisms to the behavior approach as well. And I'm coming at this from an educator's perspective, and so we're looking at what learning means to us as a processor, which experiences, they're permeated through knowledge and not through internalization. They're not brought up by natural maturation or illness, hunger, anything along those lines. The cognitive theorist from earlier, they emphasize a change in the knowledge, which is an internal mechanism, while the behavior theorist, they emphasize changes in behavior that has to be measurable. It has to be observable. So those are the two distinct changes or differences between the two. Moving on. Behaviorism is a learning theory that only focuses on objectable, observable behaviors. It discounts any independent activities of the mind. So that's it in a nutshell. Behavior theorists, they define learning as nothing more than the acquisition of a new behavior based on environmental conditions. Okay? When we start looking at this approach, the teachers apply strategies to academic learning. And the focus is on academic improvement, not necessarily the classroom conduct, if you will. Behavioral strategies pose concerns. The side effect of punishment, which is one of the conduits that we're going to be talking about, it affects individual students differently. So when we're talking about behavior approaches, notice that when you observe in the classroom how teachers manage their students, some of them don't respond as well. And so we have to look at that as some of the issues we're seeing. So the behavior learning process includes those four factors as well. So those are the terms that we're going to be using, right? I'm going to move on to the next slide. Classical conditioning is the Pavlovian dogs, where Pavlov, he wasn't intended on creating classical conditioning. He was interested in the biological effects of salivation for dogs and at the time, but came up eventually with a neutral stimulus could produce a conditional response. That's the end of the story. But from there, if you need to look at it and to get a review, there's a nice little video that I pulled up, and so it covers the classical conditioning component that also has an impact upon how I originally taught in the 90s, because this was the standard we used in special areas. The Pavlovian example, again, is before the condition, you had an unconditional response, which would be an unconditional stimulus to a response. And eventually we would introduce a neutral stimulus, and if there is no response initially, and people are conditioned to respond to a bell, for instance. We teach people that a bell is the beginning or end of something, correct? For our students. For a Pavlovian dog, it was for hunger, and it would activate the hunger component. So that's pretty much it. These are the 4 definitions for the psychology component. And then the applied classical conditioning. Remember, you want to associate positive, pleasant events with learning tasks, which you'll see done in one of the videos that I had you look at later from Dr. Harry Wong, which he emphasizes procedures that have positive impacts. But you know what? We'll have a debate about, is that classical conditioning or operant conditioning, between the two. But so those are some of the things that we'll notice as we move along. And again, the operant conditioning one is where you're looking for more goal-directed behaviors, learning in which voluntary behavior is strengthened or weakened by consequences. Right. So those are some of the things we're looking at doing. And I think when you see the Dr. Harry Wong, the little 2-minute brief video, that talks about operant conditioning and the conditioning of the schools. And when you're doing your observations, you'll notice that a lot of your teachers are very good at procedures. And I think of operant conditioning when I see the effective behavior management teacher that you'll see. And so that's what you're kind of looking for. And again, on the operant conditioning, I inserted some of these in here. You have a specific consequence and association with the voluntary behavior, right? So you reward and you want to introduce a certain behavior, right? And again, you would also put a punishment in as well to decrease behavior. So I really think of that when we watch those Harry Wong videos. Type of consequences that can be used. That is going to be one of the things that you're doing in your plan. You're looking for a timeout situation, having students that you want to put a behavior reinforcer, then you want to strengthen and you want to repeat it. You'll notice, though, that it has to be introduced often, especially the younger the grade, because procedures are forgotten when there are short gaps of time in our schools. So that's one of the things that was brought up, was not only the positive and negative reinforcement, but also the training that you have to have for the students so they know in terms of the procedures. I think he leans more into not calling it consequences, but it's more of a procedural component. So that is his terminology that I think is utilized to make it not so cold and harsh, if you will. So that's more on the positive and negative, and those are examples that you can get. So as you're doing the second or the third, or primarily the second, if you choose that one, I think you'll be able to see that the peers and the bad behavior component. I like this. I like how he breaks these down from the positive and negative on how you can do reinforcement. Punishment the same way. You'll see schools that have corporal punishment and some that don't. But it's ironic, you really can't tell the behavior changes between the students in many of those schools. So that's something to consider when you're watching how our students regulated when things go awry for them in the classroom. The second choice was putting it all together in applied behavior analysis, right? And that's the application of behavior learning principles to understand and change that behavior through a set of events and sequences that you're going to come up with. So this is basically making an intervention for that student that will kind of put them back on track. And my special ed teachers, they'll know that if you have to write an IEP, you'll start looking for percentages. 4 out of 5 times, 80% of the time, this student will redirect their own behavior. And that's a classic example of an applied behavior analysis. Underneath here, there's a link to 5 behavior analysis teaching strategies that you could easily put into that question number 2. And that's going to give you a ton of resources. And that's one that I'd recommend you do if you're going to choose that for one of your 500-word passages. Okay, and that'll give you some of the strategies that you need to line it up. And in fact, some of them also work for the third one as well. I noticed that. Let's see, what else? And I'm going through this a little quicker because I wanted to make sure the video was shorter so that we focus on that writing activity. The third one is a current application on functional behavior assessment, right? So the general reasons students act out. I want you to consider this as you did your observations. Reflect upon why they were doing this. Some of your students were doing it for attention seeking. Some were frustrated. Some are having some other factors in their life that contribute to their behavior, and we have to put that in consideration as we write their plan. It could be just as easy as removing the student from the situation before it becomes an escalation, right? So those are some of the things we're looking at for your functional behavior assessment if you're going to choose this one. You want to list time, the event, and actual behavior and consequences, and you want to be able to analyze that. So if you went with a scenario like this, I don't want you to necessarily do a student where you're going to observe them physically, but just seeing a scenario that you would go about. You're not going to do the observational guide. I'm good. You don't want to do that one, but you want to think of a student with some tendencies and how you would redirect. So the intervention design is going to be to replace these behavior problems with new actions that serve a purpose for the student. Okay, and so the tools for preventive strategies are those 4 right there. And then the PBS can be also successfully implemented school-wide. We used to have that at my middle school. We had an entire plan that everybody followed the same check boxes and checklist. You won't see that so visually known, but for the most part, there's a assertive discipline plan that we used at my middle school that everybody followed the same check boxes. But if you had an IP or 504, we had to go in there and also add some additional accommodations. Okay, so I would ask for that. Like if there is an assertive discipline plan, what's the procedures for it? And you can use that as part of your number 3 activity if you choose the third one. So I would look at the school plan for managing behavior and if there is something in place for that. But go in and look at your teacher's behavior management plan individually and how they've altered it. And this would be a great question to ask any of your teachers as you're working on other activities. Go, what are you using for your discipline plan? And how is it successful? And how have you monitored or altered it? I would love to know those factors as well, if you want to include that in the writing component, if you choose a third one. Let's see. Self-reinforcement. Student controls their own reinforcers. So you want to empower that student to be able to change their own behavior issues. And these are some of those monitoring issues that you could put at the very end as a measurement tools to show success, because it has to be measurable, right? Anything behavior has to be measurable. So remember to consider that when you make your plan, you have to introduce it and it has to be effectively utilized. And the parent and the students both need to know what is considered expectations and how it's going to be implemented fairly for each of the students. You need to help each of the students reach an attainable goal. If they, again, have a 504 and IEP, those goals are going to be differentiated due to the student's situation that they are currently in. Give families ways to record and evaluate the progress. You're going to see these behavior sheets that go home. I recommend getting one of those as well. I'd love to see the behavior sheets that the teachers are using so that you could take a copy of that. Do you want to put that in your plan? Say, yes, this is one I would use. Here's how I might change it. I have no problem seeing that as being part of your plan if you go in that third direction. Okay. So let's see. Remember that there are challenges or criticisms of any of the learning theories that are out there, and there's no short challenges to this one as well in terms of the behavior approach. Students are punished by systems of rewards. Some people have a belief that learning should not be rewarded. Basically, if you do what you should be doing, we should not be rewarding people for that with a token system. So those are some of the things that are brought up, and some of your educators feel that way. Like, if we give you an assignment, you should do it. You should not be rewarded for it without it being for a grade. Right? Proper use of behavior strategies. You got to help students learn academically, and they need to grow from them. They can't be restrictive. So sometimes you have such stringent behavior modification plans in place that the students don't have any room for growth in the classroom. So you have to be careful with that component as well. So principals, teachers that use this plan, no one eagerly repeats behavior that has been punished or ignored, right? When actions lead to consequences that are positive, those actions are likely to be repeated. So these are some of the things that are the findings from all the research. Teachers can only fail to recognize appropriate behavior when reinforced. Respond more to inappropriate behavior. Praise must be sincere. You can't you can't single out one kid because the other 23 are acting up, and you're just kind of saying, "I like how Tommy's doing this." Well, you picked Tommy, at the other 23 were not off task. And students can learn more from self-management. I did put the link from Harry Wong on discipline versus procedure. He is the classic behaviorist from the 1990s, where there's a book. It's called The First 100 Days of School. You still want to read that. It's good to have this in your construct as an adult to pull from various learning strategies. And this is one that we like here. That if you get the book, and also if you do this little short video, it kind of reinforces that it's not about the behavior, it's about the procedures in place, so that the students can have environmental factors in place that kind of monitor and help take the behavior issues out of the classroom, or minimize them, if you will. So that's what I want you to take out of this chapter. And let's see if there's anything else here. There they are again. Those are the 3 activities. You choose 2 of the 3 to write on. So it's just a 1,000-word passage. We need to have this done by Sunday at midnight, because it took me a few extra days to get this video out to you. So just make sure that you do the writing activity with this. You can pull in any resources that you want. Again, the first one kind of focuses more on the book component, where you get to pull the information in. And I do like the second or third approach, to be able to pull those techniques in on an approach that you would use in your future classroom. Okay, so hey, thank you very much for watching our video. And if you have any questions, please email me at rlweldon@troy.edu.